have our Windows Server environment, and I'm not going to start up the main server just yet. We're going to do File and create a new virtual machine, and this virtual machine that we're going to create is I'm going to choose the Server 2022 ISO. So let's just go to, so I've got my Server 2022 x64 DVD, and what I'm going to do is just set it to Windows Server 2019 because VMware doesn't have Server 2022 yet. I suppose we could go and try and get the new version of VMware Pro, but we would have to go into that thing called, what was it called again? The Bright Space Learning Zone. And as you know, we don't want to have to go through that again. So we'll just leave it to Windows Server 2019. Now, I'm going to call this, okay, member file server, because this file server is going to be a member of the domain, okay, and I'll put it to BIOS just to make our lives a bit easier. Now, this will obviously depend on the spec of the system that you're running, but I'm just going to leave it on 2 processors, 1 core each. And I'll put this up a bit faster to make the install go quicker. So I'll put it on 4 GB of RAM. In fact, let's go 2 cores. 2 cores, 2 dual core processors and 4 GB of RAM. It's going to be on fire, this machine. Right. So next, I'm just going to leave the networking on NAT just now. You can change that later. And everything else just default. Okay, now, I said earlier that so we're going to create a new disk. Now there's some options here. Now we were talking about, let's close that door over. We were talking about FAT32 earlier. Now let's say you had a FAT32 disk and you wanted to share a virtual machine. That's why you could split the disk into multiple files. Then it would make sure that none of those files were bigger than 4 GB. So you could put it on a USB stick. That's what that option's for. But that makes it quite messy, so what I like to do is store it as a single file, then it's much easier to delete later on. And if we set this to 60, it's not actually going to be 60 GB, alright, unless we tick that box. It's probably going to be about 6 GB or something, and it'll expand as needed, okay, but it'll present itself as a 60 GB disk. It's clever that way. So, we'll call that disk member file server dot virtual machine disk VMDK, and then I'm going to customize the hardware, and what I'm going to do is just take away the sound card and the printer, because we're not going to need a sound card on a file server, are we? Unless we're using it for, I don't know, listening to the Backstreet Boys or something. So let's hit finish there, and then once this boots, there's going to be probably a little bit of a time delay waiting on the installation happening. So let's just see what happens here. Look at that, 4 GB of RAM on fire. So change this one to English Zimbabwe, no, United Kingdom, and hit install now. And this will take us into the setup environment for the server. When it gets a minute, just thinking about it. Right, so I'm just going to say I don't have a product key. Now, at the moment, we have 4 choices, okay? So, Windows Server 2022 standard actually comes as standard without the desktop experience. It's actually a core command line server by default. Okay, you can see that the desktop experience is an add-on. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to install Windows Server Standard without the graphical environment. Okay, so just the Windows Server, just the PowerShell we're going to have, and we'll have a thing called sconfig running as well. So once I click next on that, that's going to, and we'll just accept this very long, yes, I agree with all of that, thank you. And we'll just say custom and use the whole disk. And then we're back to this familiar startup screen. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop, pause, we'll have a little break. What I would like you guys to do is do the same, okay? Set up a machine, put it on, just make sure you don't choose the desktop experience, okay? The rest of the stuff doesn't really matter, alright? Like how much RAM you give it, how big the disk, whatever. The key thing is that you get a server without the desktop experience. So then we can go and we can figure out roughly how we're going to go and share files. So what I'll do is I'll stop talking now and we'll have a little break, because this is, what is this on, 32? We'll have a short break. I'm going to go away and make myself a coffee. So after some delay, we now have ourselves a server that's finishing up the installation, and it's going to do probably a reboot in just a second, restarting in 10 seconds. So I'll just pour myself a cup of coffee. So the server has rebooted now, and we're ready to set the administrator password. So I'm just going to click into the machine and choose OK, and I'm going to use my usual password, but you have to type it in the order of the password. You can't do like extra characters and go back. So $, capital E, $, and then down arrow, $, capital E, $, and hopefully, right, it's accepted that, so they're both the same, the password has been changed, okay. So interestingly, it starts up system32 cmd.exe. And then we wait on this booting for some time, and then it loads sconfig. Now I think sconfig is a PowerShell script. Okay, so this is it. This is the whole server. This is our entire server manager, shall I say. So first thing we want to do, right, is we want to get this server onto the domain. We want to join the domain, but we're not going to be able to join the domain if we're not in the same network segment. So at the moment we have it on NAT. So the first thing I'm going to do is just exit to the command line. So that's option 15, and now we're in the PowerShell command line. So if I do ipconfig, you'll see that I'm getting some 172, some DHCP allocated address from VMware because I've got it set on NAT at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the virtual machine settings, okay, and I'm going to change from NAT to our LAN segment or a VMnet if you have the server on a VMnet to the same network segment as the domain controller. Okay, I'm going to save that, and then I'm just going to start sconfig again. Okay, and that'll reload our menu. I guess it's the server config. And what I'm actually going to do is just shut this down now that we've got it set up. So option 14, shut down server. Are you sure you want to shut down? Yes. And let that shut down. Now the reason I'm going to shut that down is because I'm going to go to my RAM allocation now, and I'm going to turn it down to 2048 because we don't need to give it 4 gig of RAM. It's just a command line server. Right. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the domain controller, because now that the member server is on the LAN segment, the domain controller will be responsible for issuing it with an IP address, because the domain controller is also the DHCP server. Now the other thing that's important with the domain controller as well is not only does it issue the member server with an IP address, but in order for the member server to be able to join the domain, it has to also issue it with the DNS server. So you can't join an Active Directory domain without the domain name servers installed. So now we enter another period of waiting to see if Windows Server will boot. I did this yesterday and it just went round and round forever. No, we're in luck. It's actually working. So, had to revert it to a snapshot yesterday. I don't know what happened. Right, so I'm going to go and log in. I was saying yesterday, doing this stuff with Windows Server is a little bit like American football. There's like a little bit of action and then quite a bit of standing about, you know, discussing things and waiting for things to happen, and then back in, and then more stuff happens. So we'll wait for Server Manager to load up, and the key here is we're going to have to go in and look at the DHCP options. So let's just go Tools, and we want DHCP Manager. And in the DHCP options, we need to make sure that we're sending out not only the IP address, but also the DNS servers, because otherwise the member server won't. We don't have we don't have a networking sharing center on the member server. We can't just right click and go, because it's command line only. So we have to issue this from the DHCP server. So see if we go into server, into the scope, and into the scope options, we need to make sure that option 6 DNS servers is propagating or is sending out the 10.10.10.1 address of the domain controller. Okay, and we can add more options just by doing configure options and ticking boxes. We could send out, you know, NTP servers and lots of other things. Look, there's all sorts of things in there. ARP cache timeouts. So we've got option 6 is the important one. So now I'm going to start the member file server. And this shouldn't take too long to load, because it's just a command. It doesn't have to load Server Manager or anything like that. So here we go, applying computer settings. Now, Control-Alt-Delete to unlock. So let's put in the password. And then sconfig should load up quite quickly once it's applied its various settings in the background. Sconfig is loading. So if we now go over to our Windows Server, and let's just go to address leases, and let's do, we can see that there's something on 100 and something on 103 at the moment. Let's just refresh that. Okay, so let's go back to the member file server, and then let's do exit to the command line. So, and let's just see what IP address we've got. So ipconfig. Okay, we're getting 10.10.10.100, and look, we've got the DNS suffix there. So to validate or to verify that we can join the domain, let's just ping ec.sa.com. And that's resolving as well. That means that we'll be able to join the Active Directory domain. So let's sconfig again. And let's choose option 1. Now, in Windows Server 2019, you had to join the domain using the net share command, but now that we've got this sconfig, we've got a menu-driven system. So let's go option 1, join domain. So we want D for domain, name of domain to join. That would be ec.sa.com. Specify an authorized domain user. So we want ec.sa.com slash that way, isn't it? No, slash this way. Yeah, because it's telling me here domain/user with a slash that way. Add administrator. ec.sa.com/administrator. Password. Let's put the administrator password in. Joining ec.sa.com. Right. The tension. Cut the tension with a knife at this point. It'll work, I hope. It seems to be. It's thinking about it. Right. Warning. Changes will take after you restart. Successfully joined domain. So that's brilliant. We've joined this into the domain now. So now, right. So now the reason I called it a member file server is because it's going to be a member of our domain. So let's do yes to restart. Oh, do you want to change the computer name? No, I don't. No, I just want to reboot it. So let's do 13 restart server. Do you want to restart? Yes, I do. And it's away restarting. So now if we were to go to our server, and if we go to Active Directory users and computers, we should see that there's an entry, a computer account in the Active Directory for this member server. So we'll see that in a minute. Let's just check if this is on it. Oh, it's rebooted already. Send, right. Put the password in. And we'll wait for sconfig to load there, and let's go back over to our server now. Oh, let's just open Active Directory users and computers. Right, we'll wait on that loading up on the server. Let's go back to the member file server. So now that we've joined this computer onto the domain, and we can see like remote management, we can do updates, we can do network settings. Let's just exit to the command line PowerShell, okay? And if I do dir, or we can do ls now because we're in PowerShell, so ls will work, right? So we do ls. Funny if it didn't work, it was like it's not a recognized batch file. No. So this is, we could kind of describe this as the home directory of our member server. So this is like, it's my computer, it's this PC, it's got all the usual stuff, favorites and like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make a directory, a folder as it's called in Windows Talk, to share over the network. So the first thing we're going to do is make dir, and we're going to call this folder file server. Funny how the commands make dir, but they call it a folder. Maybe it's a directory if you're in the command line, and a folder if you're in the graphical environment. So make dir file server. And now if I do dir, because dir will work as well, because we're in Windows, we'll see that we now have a directory here called file server. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is I want to share that file server across the network. Okay, because this is the file server that we're in just now. So I've got a little note of the command somewhere because it's somewhat a long command. So let me just get the recent notes. Here we go. Right. So, in order to share this, we need to use a command called New-Smbshare. So I'm going to do new, okay, and I'm going to say smbshare, and then what we're going to do is we're going to give the share a name. So we just do minus name, and we're going to say that that name will be, we'll call it file server, sensible name for it, okay, and then we're going to say what the path is. Okay, so we need to say path, and then we need to give it the absolute path in Windows terms. So let's do C:, now you can actually tab autocomplete this, C:/, and the path is actually, we can see it at the beginning of the prompt here, users, and I think if I press tab that'll autocomplete, administrator, oh, I spelled administrator wrong, admin, tab, users, administrator, and the path would be file server. So that's the full path. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to set the permissions, the discretionary access control permissions that I showed you a little bit earlier. So let's go and set full access, and that full access is going to go to ec.sa.com/administrator, like that. Okay, right, so there's the command. That's the command we want there. New-Smbshare, name file server, path, and then full access to set the access control. So I'm going to run that. Okay, now what we can actually do to verify the permissions on a directory, a folder, is we can do get ACL, okay, and then file server, right? And that'll come up and it'll tell us allow full control. It'll tell us that we've applied that. So the next thing to do is we'll head on back over to the domain controller, and we can see, look, we've got a new computer account that's been added. One of these is the file server. I'm not entirely sure which one. We can check that in a second. So let's open up Windows Explorer here. And what we're going to do actually is in the address bar of Windows Explorer, we're going to do //10.10.10.100 /file okay, because that's the IP address of the file server. That's the one it got from DHCP, and that's the path. Now hopefully this will work, and it has done. We're in. Now it says this folder is empty, right? So if we go over to the file server, we can actually, we'll just make a demonstration folder. So I'll just do this with fsutils, right? So fsutil file create new, and we're going to call it, let's say, demo1.txt, and we'll say it's going to be 1024 bytes. Okay, so fsutil is a useful command for testing files. So let's run that. Okay, and it says demo1.txt is created. So if we do now cd into the file server and type ls, I've created it in the wrong place, haven't I? Should we attempt a copy, or should we just run the command again and make another file? We'll just run it again. There. Okay, so now we've created it inside the file server. So if we go back over to Windows Server 2022, we'll see that there's demo1 right there. Okay, so let's make a file at this side and see if sharing works in the other direction. So let's do new text document, and we'll call this created on the DC, created on the domain controller. Okay, just save that there. Now if we go over to the file server, okay, and we run ls, you can see the last time I ran ls there was only this demo1.txt, so let's do ls here, and we can see we now have this file here created on the domain controller. So that looks to me to be working. Now let's say, okay, this was going to be our office file server. You might not want to have to type that path in all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to map a network drive to this. So let's do map network drive. Okay, and we'll map it to, I don't know, we'll call it the Y drive, okay? And we're going to say that this is //10.10.10.100 /file server. And we'll say reconnect at sign on and just hit finish there. And now when we go to network, or this PC, we'll see that we now have a Y drive. Okay, that was another demo that I was doing the other day. We now have a Y drive here, and look, it's got about 60 gig, the same as the size of the hard drive we made in VMware. So we can have that, we can easily set that up for staff, and we can just say to staff, look, you know, save your work on the Y drive, because we're you know, if you want to move between offices, you can save your work there. So there we go in file server, and there it is there. So that's quite a successful share. I'm just going to go over to the chat and see if there's been any issues or any problems. Yeah, does anyone have any questions on that? I don't think there's anything more I need to record in this video. I think that's pretty much, yeah, let me just stop the recording there. I think that's pretty much worked, isn't it? That's a proof of concept.